Hey there, friends. Welcome to another week. Before we dive into the news, just a quick reminder. The week is a fiction. Monday, doubly so. You can get rid of either anytime you want. This is Social Justice Alchemy. Now, before we get started on the news tonight, I want to talk about, well, this is going to be regarding a news topic, but I wanted to go on a little bit of a ramble. You would hope that it was obvious to everyone at this point that the Trump presidency is a complete and utter shambles, that it's going to go down in history as one of the worst, if not the worst. Definitely the worst since Taft, possibly the worst ever. The man is just a complete shit show, and the only people willing to associate with him are people as incompetent and corrupt as he is. So, decent people, intelligent people, are tending to dissociate themselves from anyone willing to support this president and his incompetent clusterfuck of a presidency. Which is probably why Papa John's founder, John Schnatter, has resigned as chairman of the company's board after apologizing for a racial slur. I'm not too certain about the details. The article is a little bit sketchy. This is on MSN.com. It's CNBC, actually. Major League Baseball has suspended its Papa Slam promotion. I mean, it was on a conference call with a marketing agency. I mean, he basically just, he used the word that white people aren't allowed to use regarding black people. And he was, in fact, complaining about the fact that KFC's founder, Colonel Sanders, never faced any sort of public backlash when he used that word. Yeah. I'm wondering, though, how this made it out to the press. How did this get leaked? Was the call being... the call probably was being recorded, but somebody must have leaked it. And I have no particular reason to believe that it was the marketing agency. The marketing agency is there to help them with their reputation, and if they leaked that sort of shit, then their own reputation would be in the toilet and they would never get work again. I mean, the agency would completely collapse. So I'm thinking it was somebody, connected with the Papa John's Corporation who was looking to oust John Schnatter, because Schnatter has been rather public and open in his support of Donald Trump and the Republican presidency and not liking black people. So I'm thinking that this was a move from inside the board as a way to get rid of him so that they can just go back to focusing on pizza and not pushing themselves into the middle of kneeling football players and that sort of shit. I don't really know, though. This is just a suspicion. Corporations are always willing to make use of controversy if they can, do one step forward, two steps back kind of thing. You'll often see marketing campaigns that, just put a toe over the line when it comes to racial stuff. And then they immediately do their best. They apologize. They say, oh, we didn't mean to. We had no idea. And they can then generate a heck ton of goodwill by, apologizing and making amends and talking about this public thing they're doing, making penance, and thus they get even more buzz than they would with a marketing campaign by itself. The problem is, Papa John wasn't doing that. He was he was just being a giant asshole all over the place, generating the worst kind of buzz. So I'm thinking that's why they were getting rid of him. There was no way they could walk it back after he just kept sticking his face in a dog's asshole over and over again. So that's a little bit of news about Papa John's. Let's move on. Well, let's jump right into a sad note from BBC.com. 2-year-old boy in Houston has fatally shot himself in the head with an unsecured gun he found inside his home. The simple fact is that you can more or less replace most of the details in this story with slightly altered details and still have the exact same story. 2 years old, 3 years old, boy, girl, other. Shoots himself in the head, shoots herself in the torso, shoots her little brother, older brother, father, delivery guy. In the end, this country is awash in guns, and we refuse to change that. But it's not actually the American people who refuse to change that. Any poll you care to name says that a significant majority of Americans favor increased gun control, but our politicians will not touch it because the far right wing of our right-wing government, and when I say right-wing government, I am referring to both the Democrats and the Republicans. The Republicans are the far right wing of that. The far right wing is dedicated to two groups that will not let them touch the issue. That is to say, the aristocratic wing of the Republican Party, the corporations, the uber wealthy, they make a lot of money selling guns. So obviously we are not going to touch the issue as far as they're concerned. The other wing of the Republican Party, the fascists, refuse to let the government do anything about guns because they need the guns to protect themselves from immigrants and other shades of brown people. And because of the way our government is set up and the way the fascists have manipulated it over the decades, there's very little chance that we can tackle the issue anytime soon. We will continue to see small tragedies like this and larger tragedies like Parkland and Sandy Hook over and over and over again until we finally get a government that gives a damn. And even then, it'll take monumental effort. Even if we manage to get a left-wing government in place, it'll take a monumental effort to overcome the barrier represented by the extreme right-wing Supreme Court. I have no idea how long it'll take, if we will manage to do anything, before we finally end tragedies like this. Let's see if we can't move on to something a little bit less heartbreaking. Now, from BBC.com, I don't know if I can really claim a victory lap on this one, and I told you so, but Theresa May's cabinet has collapsed, more or less, because, there's been a string of resignations. Boris Johnson quit. He was the Secretary for Foreign Affairs. Last week I talked about the story that May's cabinet had come to an agreement after a 12-hour conversation. And this week, it's looking like that was not a happy conversation. Yeah, basically, there's no happy ending for the British when it comes to Brexit. That basically, the Tories, the Conservatives, the homegrown fascists for the British, they want to retain their privileged relationship within the European Union without having to sacrifice anything for the European Union. Basically, they want to be, the U.S. of Europe, and they just don't have our overwhelming wealth and military resources, so they can't get away with that shit. So a little bit more Schadenfreude coming from the collapse of the May government. The May government hasn't collapsed, but her cabinet is getting shuffled. Deck chairs on the Titanic, that sort of thing. All right, let's move on. Now, this story from BBC.com, kind of a downer. It's an old story, or at least I should say the story has been going on for quite some time. Human rights lawyer Wang Kongzhang. No idea if I'm even close on. Some idea. Wang Kongzhang. Kind of close. He's a human rights lawyer. He was arrested as part of a sweep known as the 709 crackdown, because it began on July 9th, 2015. He was one of dozens of lawyers and activists arrested by the Chinese government. And he is the only one who has neither been tried nor released since then. His wife doesn't even know whether he's alive. He's been kept in detention, no access to legal representation, no communication with the outside. Go to BBC.com, you can find at least a fragment of an interview with his wife. I think it's safe to say that the 20th century and the early 21st century have shown us, if nothing else, that Leninism, Stalinism, Maoism have confirmed that that form of communism is a failure. Come at me, tankies. Meaning that if you take the means of production, as it were, out of the hands of the bourgeoisie, out of the capitalists' hands, away from the wealthy, the 1%, and put them in the hands of the state, that works no better than having it in the hands of the bourgeoisie. Stalinism collapsed ultimately largely because, it was just too inefficient to try and run an entire economy through a single organization. Maoism, what it's evolved into, I should say, this sort of corporate fascism that we have in China, is running a bit better, if only because the corporations are still allowed to exist, and they're not run directly by the central government, but they are answerable to the central government. So it's very much like modern Russia, Putin's Russia, rather than Stalin's Russia, Khrushchev's Russia. And this is the sort of thing that you get out of that corporate fascism, that for-profit government. I recall hearing about this, not necessarily at the time, but in the years since. The story has popped up occasionally. Prominent lawyers still missing. It's very unfortunate, and I wish there was something we could do about it. But at the moment, China is too valuable as a trading partner for the U.S. to dare doing anything to upset it. So that guy is going to remain among the vanished. Damn shame. Let's see what else we have. Next up, from ABC News, Starbucks is getting rid of single-use plastic straws. Now, they're doubting this is an eco-friendly thing, and McDonald's and other food retailers, as they're called, are also phasing out single-use straws. I don't think they give a damn about the environment. I have no particular illusions on that score. Instead, I'm thinking this is a matter of trying to save costs, eliminating single-use anythings wherever possible. If they could, they would go ahead and, find a way to charge you per sip. But the fact is that we've had sippy cups for quite some time. We don't necessarily need straws. They're just something we've always had. I kind of applaud the move, but I'm not buying the eco-friendly message. It's about eliminating costs. That's really all there is to it. So, good move, bad reasons. And the reasons really do matter. If they really were eco-friendly, then we wouldn't really have plastic anythings anymore, I don't think. Apparently, they're experimenting with paper straws, things like that. That's good, I guess. They could go ahead and come up with some sort of paper alternative for forks, things like that, sporks, plastic bottles. More power to them. The problem with plastics is, of course, that they don't biodegrade. All they do is break down into smaller and smaller particles, and then you get these microbeads, very, very small plastics that then go into the waters, the oceans, the rivers, the lakes, and make life kind of obnoxious. Well, not even obnoxious, just noxious, as in very unpleasant, polluted for the fishies and the turtles, and so on. A lot of people would then go on to say, and then that will work its way back up the food chain to us. So, yeah, that's important. That's an argument worth making, because a lot of people need to know about the way it's going to benefit them if we do something. I think maintaining a pristine-ish environment is something worthwhile for its own sake. So it feels kind of skeezy to make the profit argument. What profited the man? But it is a necessary thing. We have to make that sort of argument. But let's go ahead and move on. Next up, from BBC.com, the UN has reached a global compact on migration. The UN General Council, without cooperation from the United States, reached an agreement that will be signed in December. It's a non-binding agreement, which is probably the only reason they can get it done without the consent of the United States. Migration is natural to animals, to humans. It's always happened. And yet, it seems like every time it happens, it sparks this god-awful, huge, nationalist, racist, motherfucking sentiment. I strongly recommend you check out Philosophy Tube. I'll provide a link in the thingy. He has an excellent video on the stateless people who were rendered stateless after World War I as a result of showing insufficient support for their particular nation during the war. It was kind of a little petty revenge that they had their citizenship revoked. The thing is, in the absence of a government willing to defend your rights, you have no rights. So these people ended up being chased, basically, from place to place, just incredibly unpopular wherever they went. And of course, the people who were most likely to be targeted, to be rendered stateless, were the people who were already unpopular. In other words, the Jews. And they triggered these nationalist, anti-immigrant feelings wherever they went. So this participated in no small degree to World War II, to the rise of German nationalism prior to World War II. Today, the rise in migration is being sparked in part by global warming. And so people being hit hardest by global warming are migrating to locations that are being hit less hard. They're not being hit not at all. That's a complex sentence that requires a few double negatives. Let me try again. It's not that the places receiving these migrants, are not being hit by global warming, but rather they're being hit less by global warming. They have a slightly more stable climate, or the changes they're receiving don't impact them in quite the same way. Nevertheless, wherever these migrants end up, they are unwelcome. Unfortunately, BBC's little explanation of the UN's compact on migration doesn't go into much detail. And I'm not an expert in international law, so me looking it up probably wouldn't help all that much. I suspect it's going to be too little even in a non-binding agreement. I hope that further detail comes out and gives us a decent explanation. And that this decent explanation is of something that's actually worth supporting. Ah well, let's move on. All right, this is a big one. 12 Russian intelligence officials have been charged, indicted, not convicted, by the U.S. Department of Justice in connection with hacking the U.S. election. That is to say, hacking the DNC's servers. The Kremlin has responded, saying that there's no evidence linking the 12 to military intelligence or to hacking. Now, I kind of wonder why these massive charges, these indictments, these things always get dropped on a Friday. Rosenstein and Mueller really seem to always drop these things on a Friday. Opening Arguments, which discusses these things in detail, and I suggest you go listen to that podcast. I'm never going to stop pushing that podcast. They complain that Rosenstein and Mueller are doing this on purpose because OA records their second of their 2 weekly episodes on Thursday evening, meaning that they never get this Friday news. Ordinarily, they would have been safe because Friday was the day of the week when big news didn't happen, but Rosenstein and Mueller are always dropping their big news on Friday. And I kind of wonder if that's deliberate on their part, to make sure that the White House can't drop any huge news on top of them when they're doing this, and thus they get a whole weekend's worth of news cycle to get this covered and out of the way and kind of forgotten before the White House can officially respond. Meaning that, they always get the news cycle more or less to themselves, and the investigation never gets truly hampered, truly shut down, because if they dropped it earlier in the week, then the White House or Congress could respond in a very official fashion, possibly a very damaging fashion. By making sure that it happens on the weekend, perhaps it means that Trump, because he's always going to be golfing, will have difficulty making sure that something big and official can happen, something that would be very damaging to our democracy. I don't know if that's their thinking. This is just me spitballing. I think that might be what it is. Who knows? I don't think that we can, in fact, count on the Russian government to hand these 12 over, to put it mildly. But this is, just another connection, But, it's just another brick in the wall that Mueller's building around Trump. Here's hoping that he has something big to drop at the end of October, to kind of make up for what that fucker James Comey did back in 2016. I don't have a whole lot more to offer. I'm not an expert in the FBI or its investigations or what this would mean for the investigation. For that, you're going to have to turn to Opening Arguments. Let's leave it there. And this last story holds a little bit of nostalgia for me. CNN is reporting that by next week, we'll be down to our last blockbuster. There are 3 at the moment, 2 in Alaska, but those 2 are closing, and the last one open is going to be in Bend, Oregon. It's nostalgic for me because for a little while there, when I was in grad school, I would occasionally ride my bike over to the Blockbuster a few blocks over, and dig through the previewed movies bin and pick up just random crap. Sometimes I got complete garbage, like You Don't Mess with the Zoltan, and sometimes I got stuff that was surprisingly good, like Meet Bill. You just never knew. But this also reflects, this story, I should say, one of the effects that automation can have. Once upon a time, Blockbuster seemed unstoppable. There was a Blockbuster open in every town in America, probably several. It employed, at the very least, and even if in a marginal way, thousands of people. Automation is one of those things that can be a great thing or a terrible thing. And in the current system, it's kind of terrible. Just because Netflix doesn't need those thousands of employees. So those thousands of employees are just gone out looking for, a different kind of work. The people who owned the franchises find themselves suddenly, with a worthless rental agreement, a worthless franchise. I mean, a lot of their employees probably wouldn't feel too sorry for them, but it's not like the people who owned the franchise were incredibly wealthy. They were low-level managers. They were not the bourgeoisie. They weren't capitalists. They were just, the second rung up the pyramid. So a lot of people just find themselves cast aside thanks to, the developments of technology. There's no social safety net to catch them. And that's unfortunate. We need something better, and we definitely can't get it with the government we have right now. But let's not close on a sad note like that. Let's move on to our science segment. This week's science story kind of stopped me in my tracks for a little bit there. I would never have expected that you could develop a blood test for autism. Team of researchers did a follow-up study to confirm or affirm their success, exceptional success apparently, in assessing whether someone is on the autism spectrum by testing their blood for certain metabolites associated with what the article calls a developmental disability. I mean, it would never have occurred to me that you could do something like that, but it makes sense. We're talking about a pattern of development in the brain. This pattern of development is going to be based on the way proteins are, the way genes are processed to develop proteins and so on. You're going to see certain differences in blood metabolites and so on. I just wouldn't have thought that we would have been able to detect those or determine those and then assess them. But apparently this group had, a remarkably high success rate, depending on which study we're talking about, 88 to 96%, which is pretty goddamn remarkable. Which means that, if this test is the real deal, that instead of waiting for a clinical assessment by looking at the child's behavior, which would require you to wait until after the child was at an assessable age, typically after 4 years of age, we can see whether the child is on the spectrum at 18 to 24 months of age, which, holy hell. It also would mean that there would be far less guesswork, which is one of the things people love to throw at people with atypical neurologies, is that, do you really, or is it, because, if there is, a rather straightforward blood work test, then goddamn, that's pretty amazing. And as per usual, anything that can help us improve the lives of people who are atypical, a different kind of normal, is always to be lauded, applauded, appreciated. But I think I'll go ahead and leave the discussion there. This has been a long week for me. I'm kind of tired. And that'll do it for this week in Social Justice Alchemy. Please remember to like, share, subscribe, leave a positive review, sacrifice a goat to the dark god Nyarlathotep, whatever you'd feel like doing. That can help this thing to grow and, make me internet friends. I also share this as a YouTube upload, which you can find on the shiny new YouTube channel, Social Justice Alchemy. I also participate in another podcast, dungeonsandDebacles.podcast.com, hosted by my friend Kevin, where I and a couple of other friends are trying to unleash an ancient evil to ravage the world. And with that, this is your Social Justice Alchemist, signing off for another week. See ya.